Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Truth in Accounting's Ask the Experts webinar. Today's topic is government transparency. This webinar coincides with a new report that we just released to Truth in Accounting, our financial transparency score report. My name's Bill Bergman. I'm the Director of Research for Truth in Accounting. We're a nonprofit dedicated to helping citizens understand government finance with a view to promoting truthful government financial reporting. You can learn more about us at our website, where you can also sign up for our morning call newsletter, which compiles government financial news every day. We also offer our Day to Z website, where you can create and research states and make charts and look at states, cities, and the federal government on a wide range of financial, demographic, and economic factors. We're honored today to have Adam Andrzejewski join us. Adam is the CEO and founder of openthebooks.com. Before dedicating his life to public service. And an interesting note there, you don't have to work for government to do public service. Things work backwards sometimes. Adam co-founded Homepages Directories, a $20 million publishing company. Today, openthebooks.com is the largest private repository of U.S. public sector spending. The mission that they carry into the field of battle is post every dime online in real time. In 2020, openthebooks.com filed 40,000 Freedom of Information Act requests and successfully captured $6 trillion in government spending, including all federal spending, 49 out of 50 state checkbooks, and 23 million individual public salary and pension records. Joining Adam and me today is Truth in Accounting's founder and CEO, Sheila Weinberg. Sheila is a CPA, and she's led Truth in Accounting's initiatives since forming the organization in 2002. Her commentary on the federal budget and state and local government finances has appeared repeatedly in numerous publications, including USA Today, Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. For today's event, everyone here, all of us on the call, will have a chance to ask questions for Sheila and Adam via the Q&A feature. It's at the bottom of the Zoom menu. If you look towards the bottom of your screen or hover your mouse over the bottom, you should be able to see a panel with Q&A. Just type your question in that box at any point during the event, and we'll try to get to it. I'm going to turn over to Sheila and then Adam for comments, and then we'll get to the questions. Sheila?
Oh, thanks, Bill. And again, thanks, Adam, for joining us. We really appreciate it. We released the Transparency Score Report for the states on Tuesday. Like all this, our other work, we issue this to encourage governments to provide citizens with the information they need to be knowledgeable participants in their government. We believe that our representative forms of governments are at stake because people cannot advocate for tax and spending policy based upon the wrong numbers, or they can't even figure out who to vote for. So we believe transparency and government accountability is important. That's why our work is important. And Adam's work at Open the Books is also important. To summarize the financial transparency score report, bad news. Overall, the 50 states, the transparency score went down. And overall, only 37 states received a clean opinion, down from 10 states last year. Now, what's a clean opinion? It's kind of an accounting term. It's a disclaimer opinion. It's an opinion where us accountants look at, the auditors, the state produces the books, the auditors look at them and make sure that the books are done correctly. So the states can get a clean opinion, meaning, everything is fine. Or they can get a qualified opinion, which means there's some mistakes in there, but they're pretty bad, but not horrible. And then you can flunk your audit. Now, in the private sector, if you do not get a clean opinion, life becomes bad. The IRS starts looking at you. The stock exchange probably would kick you off. Your creditors look at you. Your stockholders look at you. But for some reason in government, nobody cares whether these governments get clean opinions or not. And in fact, Colorado, Georgia, and Nebraska actually flunked their audit. They got a disclaimer opinion, and then 10 states got qualified opinions. Alaska, Arizona, Florida, Illinois, Kentucky, Missouri, New Mexico, New York, Nevada, and Ohio. In essence, they got D's on their score. Now, 8 of these opinions were a result of the government's processing all of those hundreds of millions of, if not billions of dollars of unemployment benefits that the federal government handed out. While the government handed them out, but they weren't sure, they didn't double check, well, will the states be able to process these properly? And many of the auditors in the states found out, no, they were not able to process them. One of the worst offenders was Colorado, and they fell 8 places in our scorecard because they got a disclaimer opinion related to the unemployment claims, and now they're at last place. They only got 46 out of 100 of our score of 100. Connecticut and Vermont, they got better. That's the good news. We don't have very much good news usually, but we have a little bit of good news. Connecticut and Vermont got better. They were the most improved states, gaining 25 points because their largest pension plans were able to finally get clean opinions. We judge, we also look at how long does it take for the government to issue their financial statements, and no states were able to issue them within our criteria of 100 days. Corporations, we're actually being generous. Corporations are required to have their statements done within 45 days. So we give them 100, but nobody met that criteria. And then the other thing that we find, which is a little disconcerting, is the states have a tendency to use old pension numbers. So when they report how much liability for their pensions are owed, they're using a year-old numbers. They don't use the current numbers. Even if they have them, they don't report them on their balance sheets. This is kind of like looking at doing your budgeting and looking at your finances, looking at year-old credit card statements. We think it's critical that they look and use the most recent numbers. And we also found that 30 states did not report they reported less than 95% of their retirement liabilities on their statements. What can states do to get better? Well, we urge them to clean up their books, institute better systems and controls, especially related to those unemployment systems. What you can do is go to truthinaccounting.org to read the report. Go down to the bottom to sign up for Morning Call, which Bill sends out on a daily basis. And at the top, to support our work, we urge you to hit the donate button. And also we urge you to go to Open the Books website and find out more information about distributions that governments are making. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Adam, and he can even tell you more about Open the Books and its work.
Well, thank you, Sheila. Thanks for that kind introduction and the invitation to join today's live stream. For the past 10 years, we've asked one question: what government program is running well? And that's why the introduction to your report is so valuable here today, because government accounting, even at the most basic level, it's a mess. So, we take on the answer to the question, what government program is running well, from the bottom up on a transaction by transaction basis. Truth in Accounting comes at the problem in a top-down fashion, using the financial statements, but both of us at its nexus are both using what government tells us to make the case. Sheila, if you and I say it, people can doubt it. If government says it, it has to be the truth. And that's why I'm so excited here to join the call today. What you guys do from the top down isn't being done anywhere in the country, and it perfectly dovetails with what our auditors at openthebooks.com are doing from the bottom up. Just a brief description of our mission at openthebooks.com. It's, as Bill correctly quoted, every dime online in real time. If they tax you, they have to prove they're spending our money honestly, efficiently, and in ways that help people who have real needs. And so then on those open books, we audit them and the audits make national news. I just want to describe briefly the scope of our data capture because it's unprecedented. Last year, we filed 40,000 Freedom of Information Act requests. That was the most in American history. So 1 year, 40,000 Freedom of Information Act requests, and we successfully captured $6 trillion of federal, state, and local spending. And we post all of it on our website at openthebooks.com, so you can hold the political class accountable for tax and spend decisions, so you can follow the green and follow the money and hold even your local school board officials accountable. So our data is comprised of about 25 million public employee salary and pension records. For the first time in our nation's history, that's virtually every single public employee with their salary, and if they're retired, with their retirement annuity payout every single year. We've got nearly all federal checkbook transactions since the year 2001, and in 49 out of 50 states, we have the line-by-line vendor spending of those states. We're suing California for their checkbook expenditures, and actually tomorrow at 2 o'clock, and we expect to win this in the Sacramento, California Circuit Court. We're actually in oral argument on summary judgment versus the California Comptroller, Betty Yee. We not only open the books, but we audit them. The audits make national news. And so here's just some of what our national investigations have shown since July. So you may have heard of these things. Maybe you didn't know it was openthebooks.com. Sometimes once it becomes national news, we're actually not cited on the data point. You remember the Biden official in June when they came to the Sunday talk shows and they said that Republicans defunded the police. Well, what we do at openthebooks.com oftentimes is we just fact check political promises. So we took a look at the 30 most populous cities and we found, lo and behold, it was Democratic mayors who had defunded the police. That really wasn't news, but it was a good data point. We took it a step further and we asked the question, what did they do with their own police protection detail funded by taxpayers? So while they defunded the police in the neighborhoods for the people, hypocritically, they increased, oftentimes by $1 million over the course of a year or 5 years, their own taxpayer paid police protection detail. And this affected policy in New York City and Los Angeles and Seattle. In August, we found and investigated one of our most impactful national and international stories of the year. As the Taliban was overrunning Afghanistan, we wanted to know how much military gear was left behind. And we were first out of the blocks with this, whether it was the BBC or Fox News. We led those national interviews, and even the Washington Post, when their fact checker fact-checked the politicians on the amounts of military gear left behind, they were citing our findings and linking back to our website. This came at a cost to our organization. When the Biden administration saw our breaking investigation published at Forbes, they erased the U.S. audit reports that they had online. Those audit reports have still disappeared from the internet to this day, but obviously we're from Illinois. We had proactively captured those reports. We put our branding on them, reposted them, and that's where they exist today. In September, we saw the Biden press conference where he wanted to issue the mandate on private employers with more than 100 employees, 100 or more employees for a vaccine mandate. And we found the enforcement mechanism tucked inside the human infrastructure bill, the $3.5 trillion bill. It's now been transferred to the skinny human infrastructure bill, the $1.8 trillion bill. They want to increase the OSHA fines up to $700,000 per willful instance within a private company if you're not following the Biden vaccine mandate. In October, after U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland issued the order to sic the FBI and parents at school board meetings, it put a white hot spotlight on his son-in-law's business, Panorama Education, and we were able to, they do surveys for K through 12 schools, and we were able to show the amazing scope of Panorama. They're in all 50 states. Their surveys cover 13 million U.S. public school students, and they're in 25,000 schools across the country. And it's the survey that critics say that then brings in the critical race theory curriculum. So this is how, just in the past couple of months, on big national and international news stories, our hard data has affected the national narrative.
Well, thanks, Adam. Bill will go off mute in a second, and then we'll be able to hear him.
Thanks a lot, Adam. Once again, everybody, we got Q&A open for you if you want on our Q&A. Send your questions in. We've got a few already. I've got a few for both Adam and Sheila. My first question for both of you is, how could Truth in Accounting's work and Adam's work and Open the Books, how can we merge, for instance, our financial transparency score, Sheila? How could we incorporate Adam's efforts into that scoring system? Any thoughts?
No, I think, yeah, I think we could expand it and, highlight, include rankings on, governments being transparent with their checkbooks. As I think Adam said it perfectly. Thank you, Adam, that, we're looking at the 30,000 foot level, looking at the financial statements and the overall financial condition of the governments. And Adam is doing it from the bottom up, looking at each and every distribution expenditure of the government. And I'm glad to see that they've also added pension data.
Yeah, Adam, have you done any 50 state ranking, or do you have any, have you organized your data in that fashion to compare the states?
So we haven't, but we piggyback off Truth in Accounting's efforts. For instance, whether it's the oversight that we do on pay and pensions in San Francisco or Los Angeles or Washington, D.C. or Chicago or New York City, or in the states like Florida, Texas, New York, California, Illinois. When we put these reports up, I'm a senior policy contributor at Forbes, and when we break these reports, they're very, very popular. Our report on the 6-figure highly compensated public employees in Illinois a year ago received over 900,000 views, almost 1 million views today on that piece. What we do is we take the Data Lab Truth in Accounting studies that show the unfunded pension liabilities and the grades of those entities, whether it's state government or those major American cities, and we add to the story some of that good research. And so what that does is it just buttresses the argument that that public employees, oftentimes through union power, they're living a really good life. Taxpayer dollars are increasing, but it's never enough. They're continuing on pay, perks, and pension benefits. They're continuing to add layer after layer, and they're already underwater. And that's the real benefit to the Truth in Accounting data. It puts the exclamation point on our research.
I was very pleased when Adam and when you guys at Open the Book started to add not just the disbursements for people's salaries, but also the accumulating pension and retiree healthcare benefits, because without that, you're not looking at the overall compensation of somebody. Often people will say, well, government employees are paid less, but once you add the pension and retiree healthcare liabilities, the current healthcare, the vacation pay they get, the numerous, I think you guys did a story on the numerous vacation days or paid holidays that they get. Their salary is often far and above the taxpayers' salaries who are paying for those.
Well, you're exactly right, Sheila. So for instance, like in Los Angeles County, the lifeguards make up to $392,000 all in, pay, perks, and pension benefits. That's unsustainable. There's 82 that make over $300,000 a year as a lifeguard. So together, we put Baywatch on Paywatch right there in Los Angeles. This same situation, maybe not in such a sexy manner as the LA lifeguards, is playing out across the entire country. So it used to be, the old paradigm was you work for a little bit less salary, then at the end of the day, you had a nice golden parachute. That's how it was for my father, who taught in the Illinois public school system for 36 years. He made less as he went, but at the end of the day, he did have a gold-plated pension plan. That whole scenario today is changed. You make a lot of money as you go. Your benefit package is gold-plated, as is your taxpayer-funded retirement pension. For example, at the federal level, if you hit your 3-year anniversary, incredibly, in the federal executive agencies, There's 1.4 million federal workers there. You hit 3 years and you receive 44 days of paid time off. So it's 11 holidays, 13 sick days, and 20 vacation days. So think about it, Sheila. It's nearly every week is a 4-day work week. Nearly, not quite every week is a 3-day weekend for a federal bureaucrat.
Adam, I think maybe we're in the wrong jobs, We're in hard jobs and we do hard jobs and we don't get paid as well and get as many days off as the federal employees. Bill, do you have another question for us?
Sure, I guess. Adam, there's no shortage of topics of inquiry for open the books out there, but what do you see ahead for you in the area of infrastructure spending? Is this something worth monitoring?
Oh, yeah. So the bipartisan infrastructure bill. So you had a number, I think it was 6 U.S. senators, Republicans joined Democrats in the Senate, and then you had 13 Republicans in the House join Democrats to get that bill passed. So it was a bipartisan infrastructure bill. Well, you have to read the fine print. It wasn't all roads and bridges. There's $42 billion for government ownership of the internet. And Bill, that is simply Soviet. You don't have to be Polish like me to remember the old Soviet Union and government ownership of networks. And that's exactly what Michael Paul, the former chair of the FCC, called this arrangement. If you think about this, it's not enough that you have big tech censoring. Government wants to own the pipe. They want to own your internet access points. And this is particularly troubling on a lot of levels. I don't care if you're a private business. If you sign up through a government-owned network for internet service, they would have access to everything. All of your correspondence, all of your websites, all of your company data, everything. Think about if you're a farmer. A lot of it's the internet of everything. The internet runs, a lot of machines nowadays. Think of the treasure trove of data government's scooping up. Think about if government, God forbid, wants to cancel you for any reason. They own the internet. They could conceivably, as government power grows, exert a lot of influence on you because of what they control. So look, it is simply Soviet. $42 billion to own the pipe, to own government-controlled networks. And we know that this was a quiet but signature proposal from the Biden administration. And how do we know this? Well, at openthebooks.com, we captured the White House payroll. And the number 2 most highly compensated Biden staffer out of 567 of those was the czar for government ownership of the internet. They wanted $100 billion. They settled for $42 billion. It's a massive number and totally unnecessary.
Well, Adam, I would think, Al Gore invented the internet, so shouldn't the government own it? Oh, sorry, Bill, I digress.
Well, along those lines, another element of potential future infrastructure spending, quote unquote, infrastructure that's out there is this Local Journalism Sustainability Act. I don't know if either of you are aware of that effort, but having government sustain newspapers with direct funding for newspapers, whatever a newspaper is, that's a curious development.
Well, this whole infrastructure and I saw, they did called it the infrastructure bill because, that marketed well. People, want to have safe roads and bridges, but they piled on so many other things that are not classic roads, bridges, and buildings. And the reason this is part of the whole budget process problem is that instead of maintaining the bridges and roads and buildings as they go along, they don't want to include that in their current budgets, and because they'd have to raise taxes or cut elsewhere. So instead, they just do not maintain them properly, and then they start falling apart. And then, oh my gosh, the federal government needs to come in and save us and provide this huge infrastructure. Shouldn't the state and local governments and the federal government be maintaining these? Shouldn't they, in their regular budget, have we want to build a bridge in the future. Let's go ahead save money to do that instead of either borrowing it or getting it from the federal government. Adam, what's on your mind there?
Well, you've just articulated the classic problem of what we've been faced with over the last 20 years on a bipartisan basis with these omnibus, minibus, massive spending bills. So, we have a petition campaign at openthebooks.com, and I encourage everyone to sign the petition. The petition tab is off the top of the homepage of our website. And the petition just simply says, urge Congress to read the bill. Take a 72-hour legislative timeout on the last version of legislation to post it online, a pause, a timeout to give the people, the press, the pundits, all of us a chance to see what's in there. Do we really have a representative republic if the representatives don't have time to simply read what they're voting on? And so look, in the we still, I don't think, we haven't seen it have text of the skinny version, which is massive, $1.8 trillion, we're told, human infrastructure bill. But if you look at the last proposal, which died, which was 3.5 trillion, you had $10 billion in there for a citizen climate core. You had $1 trillion in there for what was basically a basic universal income. You had just a lot of things in there that are completely that need to be debated in their own bills. So break apart these big, massive omnibus bills, break them into individual bills. If the idea can survive the debate in Congress, it's good for the American people. That's where we need to be.
Interesting. All right, let's move to some audience questions. We got a semi-lengthy one, but it's pretty interesting and certainly up Adam's alley, I think. Tim Hodeling has the following ideas or questions. My Florida county made purchases in the COVID emergency that failed to comply with normal procurement procedures as detailed in ordinances. That aside, as a management emergency action, there is an emergency procedures ordinance mandating a written record of circumstances, methods, and action of why the spending was in the interest of the public. What do you think about the emergency exceptions and/or procedures in terms of transparency, Adam?
So I think the law has to be flexible to account for the different scenarios that can come down the pike. Under all circumstances, everything should be posted in real time and have public debates on it. Look, for a long time, we've advocated something that would cut corruption tremendously and save taxpayers a tremendous amount of money. And it's called a Dutch auction. Use the latest in technology. Put your request amongst qualified bidders. You run an online auction where they bid down the packages, the prices for goods and services. You pre-qualify your bidders, you put what you need out there, you run your auctions, and everybody can see in real time how that price drops amongst qualified bidders. You can even use it for employment positions. There are many procurement issues that can be run off a Dutch auction and save taxpayers 20 to 40%.
Interesting. All right, here's a question or reaction from Rick Skiba, a friend of Truth in Accounting. What's the difference between the government owning roads and owning the pipeline of the internet? Should we think about, and I'm reacting to Rick's questions, why is government in the roads business in the first place? Any thoughts? How do we account for roads, Sheila?
Well, roads are, they're accounted for on a cash base, on a how much they cost basis. Again, there is, we do have a friend of Truth in Accounting, Strong Towns, who actually believes that these roads, bridges should actually not be an asset on government's balance sheets, but they should be a liability because they have to maintain them after they're made. And that's one concern I have with this huge infrastructure bill is they're going to go ahead and put more and more, roads and bridges out there. Who's going to maintain them? And are they going to just, or I think that Strong Towns also did a study and said, hold it, instead of building new roads and bridges that well, if we have a ribbon cutting ceremony, that keeps me popular with my voters. Hey, let's go ahead and get all these deferred maintenance, this maintenance caught up. They're not looking at that. They're looking at providing new ones instead of maintaining the old ones.
So in terms of roads versus the internet, we didn't have an internet problem. For instance, private internet companies had spent nearly $2 trillion over the last 20 years to provide internet access to everybody. And so you can accomplish what you want, through the private sector, through government regulation of that, and mandates for coverage on the internet. And private companies were coming in with their own solutions to be able to scoop up market share. So I think that's the main difference, is that there was already a private sector solution in place and government's coming in, which just increases their size, scope, and power.
Yeah, a little scary there. Here's a question from an anonymous attendee, or a suggestion that is a good one. Is there any evidence that states with better transparency have lower spending per capita, or lower debt per capita, or some other metric? Any studies that look at the relationship between transparency and government outcomes?
At Truth in Accounting, we have a really smart, intelligent economist who looks at metrics like this. And I'll turn it back over to Bill for that question.
Well, thank you. Yeah, Courtney, you're doing a great job, and we appreciate it. No, we do a lot of that, and in fact, there is a strong relationship. We haven't formally published things along those lines, and maybe we should get our work together and do a formal study, just like you're suggesting, Mr. Anonymous attendee, or Mrs. Adam, how about you? What's your reaction? Are states with better transparency maybe more managed better in general, and perhaps have better outcomes or productivity of the public sector as well?
So I'll just answer it from an anecdotal perspective. I can tell you that when politicians run for office, they run on transparency, and once elected, they run away from it. And so transparency, citizens can't hold their government accountable unless we know what's going on. It's not a level playing field if citizens don't have access to the data. And so that's, for instance, why our lawsuit in California is so important, because the California comptroller is making arguments in court that the burden to produce the line-by-line spending in the state of California is greater than the goods citizens would get from receiving it. Incredibly, they're making the argument that for our own good, they are restricting access to how they spend our money. It's an absolutely incredible argument in the state of California. And there's only one reason for that. It's only one reason why they're fighting so hard. And that is because they have a lot to hide. They have a lot to hide from the people. So the American experiment is set up that they work for us for the first time in the history of the world, recognized in our founding documents. We derive our rights from God and not government. We institute to the government to secure our rights. And that means in America, the citizen is sovereign, that when they spend our money, we get to review their actions and hold them accountable. And that is why transparency is baked into Article 1, Section 9 of the United States Constitution in the Powerful Appropriations Clause. And it says that a regular statement and account for the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. And now in the internet age at openthebooks.com, we just feel that means publish everything online in real time. Show us where the money goes. Open the books.
So, some wonderful thoughts there, Adam, regarding sovereignty and the nature of our government and who serves who. I have to react to that in the following fashion. Our government, in its financial report of the U.S. government, introducing the balance sheet, which has roughly 20 trillion in assets and many times that liabilities, we're offered the following comforting sentences. There are, however, other significant resources available to the government beyond the assets presented in these balance sheets. And here's the language I'd like you to react to. They include the government's sovereign powers to tax and to set monetary policy. In other words, we should be calm and feel good that our government is going to be okay because it can take our money away. And not only that, but they're claiming to have the sovereign power. They're possessing, who is sovereign in the United States, Adam?
Well, the people are sovereign. So look, we uncovered a little bit of this, and this is going to be an interesting string that plays out over the next couple of months and probably the year. So we filed 3 Freedom of Information Act requests on the Federal Reserve. Our objective at openthebooks.com is to audit the Federal Reserve. I mean, you cannot follow the green if you don't audit the Federal Reserve, because on every single dollar bill, it's printed on there. It's a Federal Reserve note. So you literally can't follow the money unless there's transparency at the Federal Reserve. Here's the 3 Freedom of Information Act requests. Their salaries. Who in which position made how much last year? Here's the second one. Their line-by-line checkbook expenditures. We get this from the federal government, 49 out of 50 states, and about 15,000 individual units of local government. So the Federal Reserve as an agency, we requested that. We haven't heard back from them on it yet. We also requested their credit card spending. I want to see on their electronic credit cards where they're spending our money. Okay, so the first request, we heard back from the Federal Reserve. I wrote about this last couple of weeks ago at Forbes. They've got 23,000 employees. We requested all of them, name, position, salary, and they actually produced 369 of them. And so we're looking to file a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit on that request to get the other roughly 23,000. They arbitrarily gave us everybody who makes more than 225,000 only at the Board of Governors, okay? And they've got obviously two massive other branches to the Federal Reserve. So this was an arbitrary number. They mischaracterized our request on purpose. And so we have to file a lawsuit to open the books on their salaries. And keep in mind, for the first time in American history, we've successfully captured virtually every single public employee's salary at every level across the entire country last year. So we're serious about breaking open the Federal Reserve payroll file. And I'm sure we're gonna have to sue for their checkbook and their credit cards as well, but we're up for it.
I look forward to following that effort closely, Adam. Along those lines, we have a statement of appreciation from Dan Hazard. I just got to relate. Elated that TIA and Open the Books have collaborated on a strategic alliance. Hopefully this presentation could be repeated at the 2022 Freedom Fest. Dan Hazard, that's an interesting venue. Perhaps we should follow through on that. Here's a thought again from Tim Hodling. Roads and bridges, thoughts on public-private partnership approaches. What's any feelings there? What is the nature of the public sector? How private is some of these public-private partnerships? How do we account for this stuff? Anybody?
I'll weigh in. Sheila, you might have thoughts as well if you want to go first.
I know, go ahead, Adam.
Okay, so look, I like to keep the lines clean. I don't like to blur the lines. When lines get blurred, it introduces cronyism and taxpayers get screwed. So I don't like, on its face, typically, I mean, other than, obviously at the Department of Defense and things like that, you have to have public-private partnerships. But I like to minimize those type of things because it quite simply blurs lines. And in this country, both the left and the right have conspired to put in permanent government. Here's the definition of it. It's government that cannot be changed by virtue of an election. And oftentimes public-private partnerships or government functions that get funded by taxpayers, but offloaded to nonprofit organizations is a perfect example of what I'm talking about. A nonprofit is not subject to the Freedom of Information Act sunshine laws. They're not affected by an election. Taxpayers, if they fund it, have no control then over the policy if that type of arrangement is codified in the law. I don't like it. I think we should minimize it only in very, very unique situations.
Well, Adam, I think your data would also indicate, talking about nonprofits, I was shocked to find out how much United Way, Jewish United Fund, other nonprofits are funded by state and local governments. I went to an Illinois budget hearing in my local community, and I thought it was going to be a hearing about how to be transparent, how to be accountable, how to only spend the money we have. What it was numerous people coming in saying, I want more, I want more. And one of them was the local chamber choir. And I'm like, the state government is funding that. There are, as you say, there are so many nonprofits funded by the government. And then, as you mentioned, then they don't have control over and how much, okay, so I'm in a nonprofit, you don't know how much the executives there are making. And they do make a lot of money.
So what we did is we took it's really good research. We have to publish the report. It's all in my inbox, and we just suffer like you do, Sheila, from a lack of capacity oftentimes. So here's what we distilled. We took the entire federal grant making apparatus and we took the top 100 nonprofits, and then we went through their 990s and we put their executive compensation on there. And so the report purely and simply will be the top 100 federally funded nonprofits that derive over 90% of their income from the federal government and whose executives make more than the president of the United States.
Yep.
I've got a related question for you, Adam and Sheila. Thinking about, looking lately at one of your initiatives, Adam, you're pretty interested in the Ivy League. I thought you cared about open books and government. Why are you so interested in the Ivy League along those lines?
Exactly, Bill. So one of our principles is we don't need more scrutiny or transparency on the private sector. Basically, all of us, we're already transparent. We need more transparency to level the playing field on government. And the Ivy League actually fits that bill. So you got 8 schools of the Ivy League. They're organized as 501c3 public charities, private organizations. However, in a recent 6-year period, our auditors quantified that they received $42 billion at U.S. taxpayer cost. That's U.S. taxpayer provided subsidies, direct federal contracts and grants, and special tax breaks on their endowment and investments. We took a look at whether or not the 8 schools of the Ivy League over the 6-year period, how much money they received on federal contracts and grants at $26 billion versus how much they collected in undergraduate student tuition at $22 billion. The 8 schools of the Ivy League are now more federal contractor than they are educator. We just released over the course of the last couple of weeks our forecast of the Ivy League Endowment. We did this investigation, we put it up at Forbes, and I think it's pretty stunning. Just this year, in fiscal year 2021, the collective endowment of the Ivies went up by $50 billion in 1 year. It went from $144 billion up to $184 billion. So we said that's striking. So at the current gift and giving rates and the long-term rate of return going back 20 years of the collective Ivies, how long will it take for them to have $1 trillion collective endowment? 27 years. So Bill, what that says is their $100 billion optics problem on their endowment is soon going to become $1 trillion optic problem on their endowment. And so here's what we all need to say to the Ivy League: lighten the load on the U.S. taxpayer.
I'm encouraged by your enthusiasm for that idea, Adam. Thank you for it as a fellow citizen. I'm reminded of the ambiguity in our government statistics on employment, where we have a breakout for government employees versus private sector. And our public sector, how big is our public sector compared to what we have for government employees and the overall. Our government maybe is a lot bigger than it is formally along these lines.
Yeah, Bill, we looked at the highest a few years ago, looked at the largest employers of the in the Chicagoland area, and the federal government was 3 times higher than the closest corporation. And that's just the federal government, much less the state and local governments. So the governmental employees are growing for more and more as we go. Adam, I would kind of ask a question. I hope I don't put you on the hot seat too much. A lot of this work you're talking about seems to be aimed at the Biden administration, aimed at Democratic elected officials. Can you provide, but I know you're nonpartisan, so can you provide an example of your work and how it also affects and maybe look negatively at Republicans?
Yeah, so we just so first off, we give the President Donald Trump administration an F on spending and debt. So over the course of the first 2 years of the administration, we took the Republican leadership in Congress to task on all the national news shows. House Speaker Ryan and Mitch McConnell in the Senate, they passed when Trump, so you have all of Congress with Republican majorities, Republican President Donald Trump, and they passed $1 trillion budget deficits in those years during boom times. And we put a big spotlight on that. We've gone back through Republican and Democratic administrations. When George W. Bush took office, the national debt was $5.8 trillion. When Donald Trump left office, it was roughly $28 trillion over 20 years. We just did an oversight report called Mapping the Swamp, a study of the administrative state. We did the same one in 2016 to show what President Trump inherited from the Obama administration. We updated that report to show what President Biden inherited from the Trump administration. And so here's what happened. The swamp is at an all-time high. President Trump promised to drain the swamp, and the swamp grew to an all-time high in the executive agencies of 1.4 million employees, which is actually 40,000 employees more than where it ended at in 2016 at the end of the Obama administration.
Great question, Sheila. Great answer, Adam. Here, in the spirit of the topic of the day, here's an anonymous attendee asking the question that follows. Who funds Open the Books? Can we get a percentage breakdown?
Yeah, it's about 20% rank and file individuals, about 80% foundations, and other large individual donors. So we're only funded by people. We would take corporate money, but corporations, I guess we've just really never pursued. We have virtually no corporate money at openthebooks.com.
So a question from another attendee is, do you have a newsletter? How can I stay in touch with you, Adam? We have one at Truth in Accounting. How about Adam?
We do about 8 mailings a year, and we do 1 or 2 subscriber emails per week. So if you just send me an email at adam@openthebooks.com, I'll get you on the list. Or you could just sign up at openthebooks.com and you'll be on the email list.
Yeah, and often Bill in his morning call from Truth in Accounting, we often cite your work. So it's another way to get out your information.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that morning newsletter that you guys do, that should be required reading for anybody that's interested in government or government finance. And in today's day and age, that should be all of us.
We should all be concerned. And
yeah, Bill does a great job of aggregating federal, state, and local government budgeting and accounting stories. We use it to publicize information like Adam's. And then also, like on Tuesday, we highlighted that our transparency score was issued.
I'm going to get a weighty question in from Barrett Peterson relating to some of Adam's questions or thoughts about the statement and account clause. Barrett Peterson asks or notes the following: the appropriations clause, like many state laws, emphasized cash flow. It was designed in a time of poorly understood or non-existent accrual liabilities or other modern techniques and transactions. So Sheila, I guess maybe we could start with you on this one. What is this cash versus accrual stuff about? Why is that important?
Well, the cash basis is just my checkbook. Here's how much money I have coming in. Here's how much money I have going out. And governments, especially state and local governments, they have balanced budget requirements that say my cash coming in should equal my cash going out. And that's how we theoretically hold our elected officials accountable, because they can't spend more money than they're taking in. But what elected officials figured out is, oh, if I go ahead and promise things for the future, then cash isn't going out, but I get the benefit of providing those benefits to, for example, union workers, and they might vote for me, but the taxpayers don't have to pay for it. So governments have gone ahead and promised benefits that aren't being accounted for. At the federal level, Adam was mentioning the debt at $29 trillion, but Congress and the president have promised more than $100 trillion of those benefits in the future without figuring out how they're going to fund those. But those are not included on the federal's financial statements or in the budget. So again, Adam was mentioning who expanded the government more than, was it Democratic leadership or Republican? Well, when George W. Bush was in office, they went ahead and expanded Medicare. They promised people to have prescription drugs. They did not set up a long-term funding mechanism for it. They incurred this cost. It expanded government beyond what more than anybody has since Medicare was enacted, but that didn't hit the books. It didn't hit the books. And state and local governments can go ahead and balance their budget, again, that's why we're into problems with pension and retiree healthcare benefits, because they've gone ahead and promised those, and then they don't adequately fund them. And so that's why, we believe that, we believe in what we call fact-based accounting, full accrual calculations and techniques. You shouldn't be able to promise something, get votes for, without having to include it in your budget.
Yeah, and there's really been no hope to ever fund those promises. That's what you see in Illinois on the unfunded pension liability, just on the 5 major statewide retirement plans. Moody's did a study, and it's $350 billion of unfunded pension liability just on those 5 plans. There's only 13 million people in the state of Illinois. I crunched some numbers for Forbes on this, and for a family of 4, your share of the Illinois unfunded pension liability exceeds the median income in the state. You owe more to the pensions for public employee promises that were promised but never funded than you make in a year on household income. So that's what's called unsustainable.
Yeah, and we believe, that these budgets need to be recast and recalculated so that these promises are included in the budget. So when they go ahead and promise these benefits, it's almost immoral going ahead and promising something, they're counting on their retirement, and then they don't fund it. That's a disaster waiting to happen. And, here in Illinois, we're already experiencing, current, issues because these debts have been incurred and they're crowding out other expenditures.
Well, where things are a little bit scary or depressing, and along those lines, here's a good, excellent finishing question maybe we can have a discussion about. An anonymous attendee asked the question: is there any reason to be hopeful that transparency can chain Leviathan?
Well, absolutely. The entire system is premised on individual action. So you're seeing this in change election cycles, whether it's from the left or from the right. People get fed up with policy and they create a movement. Again, whether it's Occupy Wall Street or the Tea Party movement or parents standing up in Virginia or voters in Minneapolis on getting rid of their police department, right? I mean, this system is driven from the grassroots, from people. So if people don't have the information, they're not going to galvanize. And so at openthebooks.com, we're an educational charity. We can't participate in politics. There's an iron wall between public policy and politics, between educational work and public action. And so all we can do is set the current in the stream. All we can do is educate the American people on what's going on. And whether it's the staggering cost of US weaponry left behind in Afghanistan, or whether it's looking into enforcing the National Institutes of Health to be transparent with Dr. Anthony Fauci's salary, benefit package, job description, contracts, amendments, and addendums, whether or not he's receiving royalties from pharmaceutical companies. They're withholding a lot of this information to us. So we actually did file a lawsuit to begin the process of opening the books to see what's going on there, since he's tip of the spear on policymaking in the biggest pandemic in the last 100 years. These all have public policy implications. They all have educational implications for the American people. Again, we're supposed to be, they're supposed to work for us. We're supposed to be in control. And so at openthebooks.com, our sole mission is to help educate the American people on the most salient issues of the day.
Sheila, I've heard some of your ideas and what Adam just said in light of Truth in Accounting's mission. What is our mission, Sheila, along these lines?
Well, again, we're just trying to get the information citizens need to make knowledgeable decisions. Adam mentioned California. Right now, the governor is going around and saying that they have a surplus. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. If somebody has a surplus, to me, it means they have extra money. And it also means that to the governor and the citizens in California, because they're spending this, quote, extra money. But if you look at their accrual, truthful numbers, they have more debt than any other state in the union. But because they're doing this old, antiquated cash basis accounting, they're pretending that they have a surplus. Well, they're making tax and spending policies based upon the wrong information. And I think, again, it goes down to even the voting level. These governments, state governments have a balanced budget clause. It's so the elected officials can't spend more than they collect, but they're not being told the truth. And if the governments are actually are spending more money than they're collecting right now, and if they had to raise taxes to cover that spending, the voters might not vote for them, but the voters are not given that information to make that decision in the voting booth. So that's why we issue the financial state of the states, the financial state of the city, this transparency score, and have data-z.org so citizens can gather the information they need to be knowledgeable voters and knowledgeable advocates for certain spending and taxing policies.
Sheila, I got a follow-up question there for you. Is this a choice that California makes when it decides to use these antiquated accounting procedures for budgeting, or is there something else involved? And maybe does California have to use those techniques?
No, and unfortunately, the states and the local governments use this cash basis accounting. They're not required to use it; they just choose to use it. Now, just keep in mind that a corporation that I think it's up to $20 million. If a corporation makes more than $20 million, the IRS does not allow them to use this cash basis accounting because it can be misleading and not show the truthful numbers. But these governments who make 10,000 times more than that are using this to make budget decisions, and they're using it because it provides a short-term view of the government's finances. And the elected officials are only in office for a short time. So they don't want to look at, here's the long-term problems that we're creating. We just want to look good on the short term. And we do have states like, Utah, who are doing a better job at using more accrual accounting, but we're trying to get this fact-based budgeting into the governments so the citizens know the true numbers instead of being told, hey, we have a surplus, we balanced our budget and all of that.
Well, Courtney's sending me some angry emails, so I think we have to wrap it up. Thank you both. It was a wonderful discussion, and thank you for your work, Adam. And thanks everybody for joining us. Adam, we look
Thanks,
forward to
Adam.
watching your work in the future. Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.